Good evening and welcome to another meeting of the Beal Early Childhood Center Building Committee. My name is Jim Kane. I'm serving as the chair of the committee. With me this evening is our Vice Chair Sandy Frick, chair of the school committee, Superintendent Joe Sawyer, Patrick Collins, our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, and Dan Morgado, our town manager. This is our second episode of the Beal School Building Committee, if you will, as we try to keep the community updated on the work of the building committee and our work to qualify for at least 50% reimbursement under the Mass School Building Authority's program for dealing with our K through 4 space issues in Shrewsbury, primarily focused on the Beal School. Just by way of reminder, we had an initial statement of interest for this project in 2011. The age of the Beal School is of no surprise to anyone. The new methods of teaching is no surprise to anyone. The continued lease of Beal West is no surprise to anyone. So at some point, the community realizes it needs to deal with the question of how we are educating K through 4 in town. Because of other priorities in the community a few years ago, primarily the library, we did not exercise our invitation to solicit state funding for this program. However, more recently, in the spring, we were offered a chance to come back into the program. And because of the continuing issues with Beal School, its age and the configuration, the Board of Selectmen voted to, in fact, apply for that state assistance and appoint a building committee. The building committee is made up of 9 members, the 5 of us, 2 community members, Erin Boucher, John Marciello, and Bob Cox, our Superintendent of Public Buildings. That's 9, is it not? 5.
Chris Girardi.
Oh, Chris Girardi, the building principal. Right. I always forget him. Thank you very much. Sure. So, having said that, by way of background, I think I'd ask Sandy and Joe to just outline today again for folks how we provide that K through 4 education in Shrewsbury.
Sure. I think to add some context around the discussion, we know that the building itself is at the end of its useful life. But we also need to look at our current and projected K-4 projections because we are already overcrowded. So how do we assess the overcrowding in the terms of this project going forward and to try to alleviate that stress? So currently at Beal, we have 113 half-day kindergarten students, 58 in the morning, 55 in the afternoon session. We have 136 full-day kindergarten students. And what some people may or may not know is that we also have floral first grade students. They're in an overflow class at Beal. Since the late 1990s, we've actually had first graders housed at Beal from floral. And this occurred after we had already converted 3 non-classroom spaces to classroom space due to increased enrollment. So today there are 70 floral first grade students housed at Beal for a total of 319 students. That's the full and half-time students combined. And for the rest of the K-4 Coolidge, we have grades 1 through 4, but we also have 3 full-day kindergarten classes there. Floral, we mentioned, again, is 1 through 4 with 70 students housed at Beal in first grade. Patton, grades 1 through 4 with 1 full-day kindergarten class. In spring is grades 1 through 4 with 2 full-day kindergarten classes. So just looking at the current structure, where we've already outgrown that building with today's current students, and where are we going to go going forward? And I think part of this project has to assess that piece.
And then beyond the population piece, of course, is that programming has changed an awful lot. I mean, people know that Beal was not built for young children, but we certainly have retrofitted it and made it work well for the past 25 plus, close to 30 years since it's been an early childhood center. But it's not space that's designed for that. I think where it really affects things more is that probably the biggest shift in public education responsibilities since long after Beal was built, but some time ago in the 1970s is when the special education laws came into effect. And we are required and mandated to provide certain types of education to students with a variety of disabilities, and some of those students need very specialized spaces for their classrooms, small groups, whether that's for speech therapy, whether that's for students who might be on the autism spectrum who need a more enclosed space, a whole variety of pieces. Beyond that as well, another mandate that goes back more than a decade now, I think, is the referendum on how students in Massachusetts were to learn English language if they were an English language learner. It was a ballot question that passed, and it changed pieces, but we're mandated to help students who don't speak English learn English as rapidly as possible, and some of that requires small group instruction and separate instruction away from the regular classroom. And the spaces at Beal we're using now for those pieces are literally converted storage spaces down in the basement, and it's not where we have regular classrooms as well. And then just some of the amenities, the cafeteria is undersized, whole variety of pieces with that. And as Sandy mentioned, the full day K is something we've been pushing more and more. Well over 90% of kindergartners in public school in Massachusetts are in full day K classrooms. We would be, it's something I believe at some point will be mandated by the state, but we know that's the approach we'd like to take whenever possible. And obviously that takes space because we have the morning and the afternoon sessions that doubles the space availability, but it's not the desirable piece. The amount of curriculum that we're expected to teach kindergartners now has increased significantly during my career, certainly in education, and to try to get all the reading instruction, all the math instruction, science and social studies, as well as reasonable amounts of recess, and young kids take a while to transition from activity to activity just to get their coats on in the winter. So to try to cram that into a half-day session is very, very challenging. And although we do a terrific job of it, there's no doubt that the preferable program is to have those students in kindergarten there for a full day. That's what we prefer. That's what families prefer. There's a huge demand for it and a huge waiting list. We don't have enough spots. So for all those reasons, we really, and then I guess the final piece I would say is that that's Beal itself, but we have space issues in the other elementary schools as well, where we don't have an art teacher or a music teacher who have their own instructional space. They're moving around the building, which compromises what they can do with those programs. The fact that we're trying to do more in-district special education programming, which requires space, which takes classrooms that were originally designed for typical classrooms, we need to convert them, leaves less space for the population we have, which again is continuing to grow. So for all those reasons, we're under a space crunch that's predicted to get worse over time.
Now, you bring up a good point, because I think in order to fully understand the Beal question, it's worth visiting the school. So Mr. Girardi has put 2 evenings aside, which people might find to be of interest: November 15th at 7:30 p.m. and November 29th at 7:30 p.m., so that people, members of town meeting and other interested parties in town can go get a tour of the building and understand how it's currently used, what spaces are being used for what specific purposes, and the other space crunches that might be part of that question. So now with that overview of how we're dealing with K through 4, I think it's important that we get a thorough update from Patrick on the process used by the Mass School Building Authority, because it's not just Dan's numbers, it's not your numbers, it's not my numbers. It's a result of a variety of sources of numbers from the town, and then what the state sees as the population growth or student population base that leads to the final number that we will try to serve K through 4 across Shrewsbury. Can you walk us through what you've been working on, Patrick?
Sure, and I would maybe just step back one piece in that, just reiterate that in April of 2015, the Board of Selectmen and the school committee made a joint application, statement of interest to the Mass School Building Authority. So this is not, a school department initiative, if you will. This is both a town and school department application. That's required by the MSBA. They want to see that there's broad-based support in a community with respect to school building projects. Some school building projects are put forth because of space needs, space limitations. Some building projects are put forward based upon the poor condition of a facility. In our case, our application addressed both the condition and the lack of space. And in the application year of 2015, there were 97 applications that were put forward to the MSBA. We were one of 26 communities that were selected to move forward in that process. So we're fortunate to move ahead. I think the MSBA recognized both the space need and the facility condition need. And they have a very well-established process that's on this slide here. Hopefully the camera can see that. And it's really made up of 8 different modules, if you will. And when the MSBA accepted our application and invited us into the process, they invited us into this first module, the eligibility period. And once you're invited into that eligibility period, which was on April 13th of 2016, we have then 270 days in which to complete a whole number of required items through the MSBA process in order to achieve that 50% reimbursement for project costs. And so our 270 days ends on January 9th, 2017. We're making great progress. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And this item in green here is one of the key things is that we need to secure funding for a feasibility study, which, frankly, I'm not sure I really like that term feasibility study, but more of, I guess, an evaluation, if you will, of what the solution might be for any space or facility problem, and in our case, Beal School. So where we are right now, this is the required items through that Module 1. We completed the initial compliance certification. Each one of these has its own specific deadline. And you can see the green check mark there demonstrating that we have completed each of those items by the respective deadline. The building committee was formed as a result of town meeting action and the Board of Selectmen action. That was done by the deadline of June 13th. We did a lot of work with MSBA on this so-called educational profile, which both Mrs. Fritz and Dr. Sawyer mentioned, telling the MSBA what our current configuration is by grade level at each of our schools and how we deliver educational programs. And then the fourth item, online enrollment projection. We provide lots of data about not only historical enrollments, which they can gain the same information from the Mass Department of Education as can anybody, all that's public information, but also with the help of town officials like Mrs. Last, the assistant town manager, building projects in the pipeline. What's coming down through the permitting process that might influence our school population. And so we provided the MSBA with all of that information by the July 12th time period. And then by October 11th, we have further conversations. Both Mr. Morgado and Dr. Sawyer and myself were involved in those, trying to clarify the information. And the MSBA has then completed what they call their enrollment projection for the K-12, the K-4, kindergarten through grade 4 grade span, out through, it's a 10-year projection, out through the school year 2025, 2026. So all of that work is done, and then finally, also by October 11th, Mr. Cox, the superintendent of public buildings, has to provide lots of information about not only our current school square footages and whatnot, but also our maintenance practices, and also budget information. The MSBA wants to see that we continue to invest in our school facilities and maintain them not only on a day-to-day basis, but that we're reinvesting in capital projects on a regular schedule, because they're making a huge investment and they want to make sure communities are good stewards of their investment as well. That also will feed into so-called incentive reimbursement percentage points if we have a robust maintenance and budget program here in Shrewsbury with respect to school buildings. So that was done by October 11th, and then we have up until no later than January 9th in which to appropriate funds for the feasibility study. And of course, there is a special town meeting on December 5th on that particular topic. And so you can see we've made a lot of progress, and we're at this final milestone here of appropriating the necessary funds to answer all of those questions. The feasibility study process basically allows the building committee to hire a project management firm and an architect to answer all of the frequently asked questions community members might have, like Where would a new school be sited, on the same site, on a new site? Can you renovate the existing building? Can you not renovate it? How much would it cost? All of those things, of course, are part of the feasibility study process. And so that's what that appropriation is about. So that's where we are in the process.
Great, thank you very much. Dan, do you want to take us through your efforts at pricing?
Sure.
Defining the effort and then putting a price on it?
I think defining the effort is the first part of this, because this is our second go-around with the MSBA relative to this process. Sherwood was the project, although it was originally started under the old School Building Assistance Bureau, SBAB program. It actually was put on hiatus, and then when it was re-energized, it was re-energized under this program. So this is our second go-about with this mechanism. What's different than the Sherwood project is there are a threshold question that's going to have to be determined before we get to the actual feasibility study itself, which is the grade configuration that this facility will be, either newly renovated, expanded, or relocated. The Beal Early Childhood Center originally was created as a model whereby early childhood education was conducted for the entire community at one location, and then the children would then go back to neighborhood schools for grades 1 through whatever the configuration was at that time. One of the things that has to be considered is what will be the configuration for K through 4 education in Shrewsbury. So that's a question, that's a threshold question that will have to be addressed concurrently with the feasibility work that will be done for this specific building, this project. For that reason, the appropriation that I would suggest be proposed for December 5 would be $1.2 million. $1 million of that would be funding that would be traditionally spent under a MSBA program, feasibility study / schematic design. $200,000 I'm reserving out is to assist in the endeavor of, in effect, taking a look back at the whole K through 12 study that was done back in 2007, but focusing entirely on K through 4, and going back and looking at how should the educational program for Shrewsbury's children, grades K through 4, be configured. So that's why I've identified a $1.2 million appropriation. I don't expect to be spending that full amount, but it's sufficient. Obviously, it's sufficient to do the job. We try to return as much as we can. Financing on it will finance that. I'll propose to be financed $1.2 million on a temporary note, anticipation note, 1 year, estimated 1%, so that's a $12,000 cost. We would then go to permanent financing, approximately 50% of it. Now, we know that the feasibility / schematic design portion will be reimbursed at 50.16%. We suspect that the K through 4 piece may not be reimbursed by the MSBA as falling outside the scope of what they understand to be the project design question. That's the case, that'll be 100% on our dime. So doing a long-term projecting, you could project netting out at $600,000 once, we have to borrow the $1.2 million because we have to upfront cash for the project. We get reimbursements throughout, and we go permanently finance whatever the actual costs are. So I'm currently showing $600,000 being borrowed within the levy limit over a 10-year period.
Now, Patrick, when you look at the number to be served for this population, the number is how many students K through 4?
So as a result of the MSBA enrollment study process, they have projected that in 2025, 2026 school year, 10-year projection, that we would have 2,320 students in the K through 4 span.
Across town.
Across town.
So then the question becomes, how do you educate that chunk of children, right, Joe?
Right.
K through 4. So when we look at the options to be studied, I think we're talking about Beal and its parcel of land. What would one do with that? Beal, and if you had Beal as part of the component, but then pushed kindergartens back into the various, all of the elementary schools, and you had a kindergarten through 4 model, how would that work? Does it work? And then the third option would be the potential building of a new school in order to deal with it if the Beal property was found to be not worthy of reinvestment.
Right.
So there are basically those 3 options that we would look at, and in at least one of those cases, we're looking at how you would deal with the current space crunches in each of the existing schools, and that's that extra $200,000 that you spoke of, Dan, that would be outside of the specific scope. And then if we're talking about a new building, obviously you need to understand where you could get a parcel of that size in town to house it. So when you look at that scope of work, what's your estimate of time that a series of entities would take to undertake that analysis? We lose 2 months already. If town meeting supports it on December 5th,
Right.
the MSBA board can't take a vote to support that until mid-February. We've lost 2 months.
Right.
And we can't do a blessed thing until they vote. So then what would, from the experience with Sherwood and others, what are we looking at for?
I think 12 months, 10
full
to 12
year.
months. So we would be at a town meeting for bond authorization sometime in January, December, January, February, December of 2017, January, February of 2018, which is a timetable that we've used previously for other projects coming in, because that also helps us from a standpoint of design and construction, because the rule of thumb is 12 months from that would be the finish, the actual design, get the bidding process going. So ideally, we would want to be bidding a project December of any year, December, January, getting a project bid, being one of the first projects out the door, so to speak, as contractors are looking to line up work for the upcoming period of time, so that once the weather breaks, then construction would start. We avoid winter conditions. We only deal with one season of winter conditions, as opposed to trying to rush something out the door, bidding it in August or September with a November start. Now you're dealing with two years. So it also works well for us in the past, making sure that the building is ready to roll for the upcoming August, September. We found with Sherwood that the ability to move into a building when you want to move into the building, where they literally, where the children literally picked up their material and carried it next door, immensely better way to go, as opposed to trying to beat a deadline to get children into a building. So for a whole lot of reasons, we'd be looking at 12-month period. Really, again, depending on the complexity of what needs to be done, any issues that may develop. But I would say that would be a very good timetable for us.
When was the full building study done for the school department? How many years ago?
That was done in the fall of 1997.
Oh,
And I might have said 87 earlier, but the fall of 1997. And I was here about 2 weeks, and the report came in. And that report is for the first time really put down in that one package the challenge for this community, which was the need to find 6,000 seats. And I know at the time there was a lot of concern about where were the children going to be? Well, the children are here.
and they're not leaving anytime soon.
They arrived, and as a result, the community responded magnificently, with tremendous generosity. But we were able to build those, build the additional seats, and as a result, we've been able to service our student population. I think when you look at the current configuration, the October 1 numbers are about to be issued, I suspect. Enrollment
Yep, I
numbers are
actually
about
have
to be
them right
issued.
here, 6,194,
So
pre-K through 12.
right.
So
So it's 6,000, plus, slightly plus, will be Shrewsbury's student population for as far as the eye can see. I think there are some that might think that we're looking at a glut and we're going to see a reduction in enrollment over time. Nothing shows that, and has been further confirmed by the work of the MSBA.
By these numbers, that's for sure. I always thought, quite frankly, my daughter's two cohorts, as I think I've heard you describe them, would ride that bubble through, and then we'd get some relief, but there's no sign of that whatsoever. So just by way of reminder, the open house at Beal School will be on February 15th, excuse me, where did that come from? November 15th and November 29th, both evenings at 7:30 p.m. And we invite town meeting members and anyone else interested in the community to come down, get a thorough walkthrough of Beal to understand the current condition of the building, how it's used, and ask anyone there the questions about how a newer space would be used. Anything else before we wrap up this version?
No, I think, you know, the one thing I would add, you asked about what the enrollment projection looked like from MSBA for the K-4 span, which was 2,320. And then they also do estimations of your capacity. So how many seats would we have if Beal were to come offline? And it's, you know, in the 1530 to 1570 range. So as a result of that, basically they've calculated that what we are to study in the feasibility study phase is a school in the range of 750 to 790 students. So that's the order of magnitude of a school that would be required to service our population if Beal were to come offline.
And that's an important distinction, because they pay for what they determine, or they're willing to reimburse over that 50% for what they determine to be needed by the community. Community wants to do something in addition to, community is free to do so at 100% of the expense.
Right.
So as we have worked with them at Sherwood, as we've worked through on this, the numbers are their numbers, their analysis that ultimately produce what they believe the system will hold. Now, you agree with those numbers, as I understand it, given what you're seeing coming through.
We
Correct,
do,
Joe?
and of course, we want to build for the right size of what we need, but you know, the MSBA's, their incentive clearly is that they don't want to build a project bigger than they need to, because they have a budget and they want to stretch that budget across as many communities in the Commonwealth as they can. So they're very specific about the projections they make, and they're very professional about it. But that, I think that's a key idea, is that this is about space needs. If Beal comes offline, and for all the various things that are being projected out years, that's the size of the project that we need to look at. That's the size of the project they are willing to support and they want to support.
Very good. If there's nothing else, just one more reminder, the open house at Beal, November 15th at 7:30 and November 29th at 7:30. We encourage anyone who's interested in the project to please come down and get a thorough walkthrough. Well, if there's nothing else this evening, thank you very much and have a great evening.